Good morning. How are y'all doing today? Good. Good to have Amanda back on. Amanda, appreciate you guys. I'm really not anywhere near good as you. So Les finds it a lot easier when you're here too. You're a little bit better at playing along with his pace than I am. Anyway, this morning we're going to be in Matthew chapter 15. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn with me there. Matthew chapter 15, and we are going to be covering verses 21 through 28 this morning. Matthew 15, verses 21 through 28. As you could probably guess, with me being as you might would expect, with me being a pastor and all, I kind of like to debate, theology and stuff like that from time to time. I have a couple of other friends that are pastors, and we'll get together and we kind of talk things over. Megan really does not at all like to do this with me at all, ever. Absolutely refuses, because I have a bad habit. Well, not really a bad habit. I have a tendency to, in these debates, try to argue from more than one viewpoint. And I do this to try and make her think about it. She'll pick a stance on where she believes, and then I try to basically just take whatever the opposing view is on that issue and try to make her think. And that's my goal, is try to make her process that information so that she understands why she believes what she does. And she just really doesn't like me doing this. She as she puts it, she just wants me to pick a side and stick with it. Sometimes I think it's good to make people look at things from a different perspective. However, by doing this, it helps us to kind of process things from a different view, understand things. You might be able to understand the other person's side a little bit better, and in doing so, it helps you to understand the weaknesses of where your view of what your viewpoint is, so that you can be able to address that and have an understanding of that, a more rounded understanding of things. When I do this for my own benefit as well, because it helps me to understand why I have the views that I have, why I believe what I believe. In our text for this morning, I believe that this is a practice that Jesus is implementing in a more real life situation with his disciples, not just in theological issues, but in a real life context. And he's doing this to help them better understand where they have been wrong in their dealings with others, and how they can better reflect the character of God. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 15 this morning, and beginning in verse 21, God's word, it reads, "Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, 'Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession.' Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, 'Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us.' He answered, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel.' The woman came and knelt before him. 'Lord, help me,' she said. He replied, 'It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs.' 'Yes, Lord,' she said, 'but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table.' Then Jesus answered, 'Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted.' And her daughter was healed from that very hour." Now, just for the background on our passage for this morning, Jesus and his disciples have now left Galilee and have traveled north up into what is modern-day Lebanon. In Mark's telling of this account, we were told that Jesus, still trying to seek out some seclusion from the massive crowd that is following him everywhere he goes, he finds a house to stay at, trying to keep his presence a secret. But word instantly spreads out, and this woman in our passage, she immediately comes to seek him out, to ask for help. She comes to the house where Jesus is staying and crying and begging for help. She cries out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." She says, "My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Yet Jesus, She's sitting here crying out, and Jesus doesn't even acknowledge her existence. She pleads, she begs, that Jesus is just simply ignoring her. Her begging is so persistent that it gets to the point that it actually begins to annoy the disciples. I get the feeling that they are simply just going to Jesus to encourage him to get it over with, to do the stinking miracle, and so she'll just leave. Get her out the door, basically. It's just kind of how I get this feel. They don't have any doubt at all about his ability to do the miracle, and nor really should they. Just recently, they saw him feed the 5,000 with just the bread and the small boy's lunch, the bread and the fish. And then he followed that up by walking on water. They've seen him raise people from the dead. I can see them thinking, how big of a deal is this really? How hard could this really be? Just heal the woman's daughter, send her on her way, let her get out of our hair so she'll leave us alone. Jesus, still not willing to acknowledge the woman, however, says to the disciples, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. He seems to be saying that this woman, she's not worthy of the miracle because she was not a part of God's chosen people. He comes across as very heartless, unconcerned, uncompassionate. The woman is in the house with them. Houses in that day, they were not very big, and there wasn't this big monstrous mansion. It was just a room probably about half the size of this, a house probably about half the size of what we're sitting here in this room, if that. So no doubt she hears the callous response that Jesus gives. At this point, she very easily could have just given up and walked away. Very easily. It would have been extremely easy to become filled with frustration or even anger. But she realized that he was her only hope. She had no one else that could help her. In her desperation, she continues her plea for help. She walks across the room over to Jesus, kneels down before him, and with every eye intensely focused upon her, prostrating herself before him, and passionately cries out, Lord, please help me. Here, you would think that Jesus would finally relent, just give in, that he would just do the miracle and send her away. She has expressed her faith. She has revealed her humility. Surely this would be enough. However, Jesus, he doesn't respond the way we would expect. His callousness seems to go even further. He responds to her by saying, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Instead of blessing this desperate woman by healing her daughter, Jesus seemingly insults her further by comparing her to a dog. This was a very common term in that day, used by the Jews in reference to the Gentiles. It was a common expression of insulting those outside the faith, the Gentile dogs. They were not the ones chosen by God, so obviously they were not as special as the Jews, in their view. Most people would have been overwhelmed with anger at this blatant insult. She wasn't, however. Her response, I love this, her response is absolutely amazing. Instead of anger, she calmly says to him, yes, you're right. But Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. I love this. It is such an amazing example of her humility. It is such a powerful testimony of the respect that she held for Jesus. She truly was a woman of faith. And Jesus recognized this. And he rewarded her for her faith by healing her daughter. I've got to be completely honest with you. And this really wasn't a very easy sermon to prepare. When you look at this, you look at how Jesus responds. There's just so much in this dialogue between Jesus and the woman that on the surface really doesn't seem to make sense. It seems to conflict so much with the way that Jesus responds and interacts with everyone else throughout the Gospels. There's many questions that arise when looking at this text. And the first question, and probably the most obvious one to me, is the question of why he takes so long to respond to and help this poor woman. She cries out for help. He acts as if she isn't even there. She begs and he won't even acknowledge her. She prostrates herself before him and he responds with a cold shoulder. It really, you're just reading in the text, just on the surface, it really seems as if he just doesn't even care at all. There are many times that we may get this impression of God as well. You pray, but your prayers, they seem to go unanswered. You feel ignored. You feel like God isn't listening, or worse, like he just doesn't even care. Like he has turned his back upon you. He's turned a cold shoulder to you. And looking at this passage, however, I believe that this is far from the case. It wasn't that he didn't care about the woman. He was simply testing her faith. Through this encounter, the woman revealed her absolute humbling dependency upon the Lord. This is especially the case with her last cry. When Jesus had equated her with a dog, she didn't respond in anger or in spite. She acknowledged her own sinfulness in light of the glory of God. She knew she was unworthy of any blessing, but humbly begged for just a small portion of his mercy, just a scrap of what God had to offer through his Son. I believe this is, more than anything else, a test of her perseverance. When she asked for help and was met with mere silence, she didn't give up. When she carried on and was basically flat out told no, she still persisted. She persevered, and this perseverance directly corresponded to the means by which she depended upon him for help. She persevered in her request for help simply because she had enough faith to know that Jesus was the answer, and because she was humble enough to realize that she had to depend upon him. She had to rely upon him. There are many times that we turn to God in prayer, but even as we voice the prayer internally, we are saying to ourselves that God will never do this for us. Doubt consumes us, and we never really, truly hand that problem over to God. We lack faith, and so when God doesn't answer that half-hearted prayer that we began with, we immediately give up. We drop it. We leave it all behind, and then we have the audacity to blame God for not caring, for not answering that problem that we never even really gave to him anyway. God doesn't give up on us. No, but many times we do give up on God. This woman truly revealed the means by which she depended upon God. With all eyes on her, even after having been insulted, she still came, prostrated before him, and begged him for mercy. She did this only because she knew that Jesus had the authority and the power to do what she had asked. She had faith, a bold faith, a persevering faith, and God rewarded her for it. He answered her prayer. This kind of takes me to my second question about this dialogue. I've often wondered, why does Jesus interact with this woman in such a harsh way, in such a harsh manner? This has been really kind of a difficult issue for me this week when I was preparing the sermon. It is far different than how he deals with anyone else in all of the Gospels. In my opinion, this is by far the most callous and cold-hearted response that Jesus gives to anyone in all of the Gospel accounts, to anyone who comes to him in faith, asking for help. I think that the answer to this question lies in the background setting of the passage. See, Jesus and his disciples, they have left Israel. They are no longer in Israel, and they have gone into this region of Tyre and Sidon, which is populated by the Canaanites. Now, if you know anything about the Canaanites, they were blatantly pagan. They were a people that they inhabited the promised land when Joshua led the Israelites across the Jordan River long before. The Israelites had been commanded by God to conquer the land and to remove the people from the land because of the wicked influence that they would have upon them later on. The Canaanites, like I said, they were blatantly pagan. They were very much opposed to the way of God. Their religious practices were very much in opposition to the righteousness of God. Just as an example of their depravity, they believed in and committed human sacrifices as a regular part of their pagan worship. They would sacrifice babies on the altar. This is who they were. This is the depravity that was in their society. The gods they worshipped were extremely evil, and the Canaanites that worshipped those gods were equally sinful. They were adamantly opposed to the ways of God. And the Canaanites were despised by the Jews for this very reason. And the Jews thought of the Canaanites as being beneath them, as less than them, as unworthy of them. The Jews thought of themselves superior because of the blessings and provisions given them through God's selection. As a result, they also thought that those outside of this blessing were inferior to them. This was especially the case with the Canaanites. The Jews would refer to those pagans as dogs. What better way to describe their inferior status? If the Jews were the children of God, then the others, the pagans, like the Canaanites, that were outside of the promises of God, were nothing more than dogs. The Jews who were repeatedly told to serve as the light of the world forgot this calling and began to separate themselves from the world. Light, it always goes out to take away the darkness, to remove the darkness. Light never stays still, but is constantly going out, piercing that darkness. The Jews, however, like many Christians today, isolated themselves from the outside world, self-righteously claiming to be above the world, set apart from the world. Light never isolates itself from the darkness, but desires to go out and transform that darkness into light, to remove its influence. The only time that this doesn't happen, the only time that light is restrained from going towards the darkness, is when someone traps the source of that light inside a basket or something of that nature. We are commanded by Jesus to go out to all nations as the light of the world. Far too often, however, we stand in judgment of those on the outside. We trap the light given to us so that the world doesn't have a chance to see it. We say to ourselves, they don't want to see this light. We never give them a chance to see it because we are too busy preventing it from reaching them. How can we expect someone to come to the light if we never let them see the light to begin with? The simple truth is, if we are not busy shining the light, we are busy hiding it. We live in a society that we know is covered in darkness. Recent events have revealed that to us. The Planned Parenthood thing, everything. We know it's there. The only way we will ever see a change is by letting the light shine. We cannot expect the darkness to be removed by darkness. We cannot cover our light and wait for someone else to shine theirs in our stead. It is our responsibility. It is our act of worship, our living sacrifice offered to Him. We cannot sit back ashamed of the gospel and still believe ourselves to be offering a living sacrifice that is pleasing to God. We cannot turn to anyone else. We cannot turn to the government and expect them to bring about a change. The government can change laws so that they better reflect Christian morality, but the result is just a bunch of sinners that might sin a little bit less. They are still living in darkness. People can only be saved from the darkness by the light of God, the gospel of Christ. At first glance, it appears that Jesus in this passage is doing precisely this, what we so many times in our as Christians do. In his approach with this woman, waiting for someone else to shine the light, or worse, turning his back completely to her because of prejudice or because of whatever else issues that lie between them, barriers. She comes to him for help, but he ignores her, claiming to only be sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Only the Israelites were worthy of his time and effort. That's the appearance. That's what it seems. But that doesn't really line up with the rest of his ministry, however. He had For example, he'd already raised the centurion's son from the dead, a Greek, a Roman centurion. He had performed miracles for other Gentiles. Why not this woman? I believe that Jesus' response was not so much about his own beliefs of superiority, but rather it was a sign to the disciples that were with him, a teaching moment to reveal their own hypocrisy. They had become annoyed at her constant begging and had asked him to help her. They didn't want Jesus to help her so much out of their compassion for her, but rather because of their annoyance with her. She was nothing more than a Canaanite. She wasn't worth their time. Basically, they thought, just do what she wants and she'll go away. We don't have to mess with her. His response, however, it brings to light the hypocrisy of their internalized Jewish biasness. It reveals where they are coming short and what they need to work with. She was indeed a woman of faith. She had endured scorn and shame to prostrate herself before the Lord. She was indeed worth the effort. Jesus helps her not because of his annoyance with her, but because of his compassion for her. He had compassion for her, and so should they. If she is loved by the Son of God, then she should be loved by those who follow him. This message, it rings true to us today as well. If a person is worthy of the compassion of God, then they are worthy of ours as well. If a person is worthy of the mercy of God, then they are worthy of ours as well. If they are loved by God, then they should be loved by us as well. What right do we have to withhold these from someone that God so freely bestows upon them? We must let our light shine to all people and not cover the gospel. Do not be ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because it is the power of God unto salvation. Another question, issue about this passage, it really kind of doesn't seem to make sense, is why he's even gone to this region to begin with. If you go back to the dialogue, Jesus had said that he was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, if this were true, why has he come up to this area that is known to be occupied by a bunch of pagans and idolaters? It's true that in the wording of Mark's gospel, it seems to imply that, at least in part, their motivation in doing so is to try to escape the crowds that have been following them in Israel. I have to believe that there's more to this, however. There's more to why Jesus came. After all, once the crowds find him, he doesn't immediately return to Israel, but he remains there for quite some time. And when he does leave, he doesn't return to Israel, but instead he goes eastward to another region filled with pagans. He has repeatedly claimed to be the one sent by God as the Messiah, the chosen Savior of God's people. If he truly felt this way, that he was only here for the lost sheep of Israel, why would he waste his time by coming to this region? Why would he not just isolate himself in the wilderness as he does later on in his ministry, or by going up to the mountainside as he did after feeding the 5,000? If he wanted to find peace, he could have done so very easily in Israel. He didn't have to go out of his way to all the way up to this land of pagans to do so. I believe that he was very deliberate and intentional in his coming to this region. I believe this because everything else he has done in his ministry was just as intentional and just as deliberate. Every step he has taken, every word he has spoken, every miracle, every healing, everything that he has done has been very intentional. They have all had a very specific intent behind them. Everything he has said and everything that he has done has pointed directly to the purpose for his ministry. Now, while it was the woman that came to him at the house, it was Jesus that first came to the region of Tyre and Sidon, so that he may be found by her. While it was the woman that immediately ran to Jesus as soon as she had heard he was near, it was Jesus that had deliberately come so that she would be able to find him. He took the first step, and he He always takes the first step every single time. In our own life, it was Jesus that took the first step to come to us. Long before we ever desired Him, He longed for us. Long before we realized that we needed Him, He provided for us. He took the first step and patiently has waited for us to be humble enough to take ours towards Him. And this was the case most obviously with salvation. He provided for us long before we ever knew we had a need. He sacrificed Himself for our sin before we ever had committed it. He provided mercy and waits for us to come to Him and receive it. It's not just with our salvation, however, that Jesus takes the first step. It is with every single need that we have. Long before we ever turn to God in prayer, He is already waiting with the answer. He who holds the whole world in the palm of His hand is powerful enough to handle whatever you give to Him in prayer. He is just simply waiting for you to humble yourself enough that you are able to grasp the great and imperative need that you have for Him. To humble yourself enough to lay it at His feet, completely trusting Him to handle it. He is God. And we have to trust Him for that. This morning, I'm going to go ahead and go into a time of invitation. And I'm going to ask that you would come forward. If you have not accepted Christ this morning, I pray that you would do so now. Come forward, make your commitment known to Him. Yeah, He doesn't care about your past. He doesn't care what you've done. He doesn't care who you were. His mercy is greater than your sin. Now come to Him. Take that step because He's already taken that first step to you. If you need to rededicate your life, I pray that you would do so, that you would have the boldness to step forward, to come now. Step out in faith and follow Him. You're called to be the light of the world. And I encourage you this morning, take the bold steps forward to shine your light just a little bit brighter, to make His presence known.